Go.
Okay.
I should be muted.
Welcome. Let's give everyone just a couple seconds to get into the session and then we'll kick off the day. And while we wait for everyone to get in here, I just want to first start off by thanking Inside Practice for putting together this wonderful event and allowing me to serve as your day one chair. My name is Amanda Ostrowitz. I am an SVP at Philo and the founder of Cannaregs, which is owned by Philo. It's a pleasure to see such a great turnout for today's event. When I graduated law school in 2013, cannabis law wasn't even a concept in my mind as a potential line of work. It really wasn't a thing. Having now been in the space since 2014, it's been incredible to watch the growth, and the last 18 months have taken that growth to a new level. Throughout the pandemic, the cannabis industry has maintained its rapid trajectory, thanks in part to being deemed an essential business in many states. And more importantly, COVID has been a huge catalyst for cannabis legalization. Many states are desperately looking for new tax revenue, as well as opportunities to rebuild their economies and provide jobs. And cannabis has been one of the best opportunities to accomplish that. We've seen a flood of legalization with New York, New Jersey, New Mexico, and Virginia coming online, a handful of other states on the precipice, and more states introducing legislation than we ever could have imagined. And the best part about the cannabis industry is that the regulatory landscape is evolving so quickly that it's constantly creating new legal work by its very nature. The work you did for a client 6 months ago may need to be updated because of a change in the law, even though the nature of the client's business hasn't changed one bit. There are very few industries where the work creates itself, and cannabis is one of them. The cannabis industry is not going away, nor are the billable hours. So in a time where other practice areas are suffering, law firms would be naive to overlook the revenue potential that can be derived from cannabis-related legal work. Looking beyond just cannabis, hemp has also created a ton of legal work. If you look at hemp, some people find it really frustrating that though it's been federally legalized, the FDA is yet to regulate hemp consumable products. While some people find that frustrating, I urge you all to think about it differently. As a result, it's created this massive patchwork of state laws. And guess what that means? That means more work for us lawyers. So at the end of the day, even hemp is creating a myriad of work because of its state-by-state framework. So as the cannabis industry continues to grow and become more sophisticated, businesses in this sector need attorneys who are specialists, not only in regulatory understanding, but in other areas of expertise as well. That includes business attorneys skilled in M&A, corporate transactions, tax law, and intellectual property. In addition, there's a growing need for attorneys who specialize in real estate, construction, water law, environmental, and so many more. This just goes to say that there's so much opportunity in the space, and if you're just beginning to explore it now, you are not too late. Not surprisingly, this has also led to a huge increase in participation from AM law firms. Back in the summer of 2018, I actually did an analysis of the AM Law 100 to see how many had cannabis practice groups, and for that matter, how many even had the word cannabis on their website. Back then, it was fewer than 10% that had cannabis practice groups. Mind you, you'll hear from many attorneys today from those firms. And less than 25% even had the word cannabis on their websites. By the summer of 2019, it had gone up to about almost 20% that had some form of cannabis practice, and about 45% of those had the word cannabis on their website. Now looking at it in 2021, nearly 45% of AM law firms have a cannabis-related practice group, and 85% have the word cannabis somewhere on their website. So that just goes to say, this is becoming more and more mainstream. The reality also is that these AM law firms already have relationships with clients working in cannabis, often without realizing it. Traditional industries are participating in cannabis, or at least are watching it closely to make sure they understand the space. Alcohol, consumer packaged goods, food and beverage, pharmaceutical, pharmacy, and tobacco firms are all working in cannabis or monitoring it for opportunity or threat. Companies in cannabis adjacent spaces, such as agricultural products, think soil, lighting, pesticides, equipment, they're all shifting into cannabis too. And if your firm represents these types of companies but isn't doing cannabis work, that's just revenue walking out the door to another firm. Mind you, you'll still need to collaborate with cannabis specialists from firms big and small all over the country. Think local counsel. Think about the opportunities to collaborate. You're going to work with firms of all sizes and there's room for everyone. So I hope you take advantage of the learning opportunities here, as well as the networking opportunities. If there's one thing that the seasoned cannabis attorneys here can verify for you all, is that your network is everything. If I can give you one final word of wisdom before turning to housekeeping, you must advocate for resources from your firm. Getting your firm to let you do the work is just the first step, but the key to doing so successfully requires proper marketing budgets, expenditures on education and networking opportunities, and investment in tools to track the rapidly evolving regulatory landscape of cannabis. There's tons of business for everyone. Truly, there's probably less than 50 attorneys attending this whole conference, or let alone even in this whole country, who can say they've been doing cannabis law for more than 10 years. And that just goes to say there's enough work to go around. And if you're new to this space, angle yourself based on your area of expertise. Specialists are needed. And just like any other area of law, referrals are everything. So go forth, learn, network, and collaborate. And now to turn to some housekeeping. So there's a lot of opportunities during this event to interact. During sessions, you can ask questions in the Q&C. You can put your comments and thoughts in the chat that's on your right side. And you can use the face buttons at the bottom of the screen to send speakers emojis and let them know how they're doing. So if you liked what I said, you guys can practice now. When you're networking in the lounge or the booths, turn on your cameras and your mics. We're not in person together yet, but faces and names together and voices, that means a lot. So we're here to build our networks. Turn on your cameras and your mics. There are also multiple networking options for one-on-one discussions in the speaker lounge. So you can connect with your speakers after a session, right? We all used to, get off stage and people would come and approach us. That's not lost because you can actually go to the speaker lounge and you can engage in one-on-one conversations with the speakers after their sessions. Presentation slides will also be available, as well as recordings of the sessions after the event. If you need any technical support or have questions, please reach out to the Inside Practice team through the chat function. And if you're blogging, use the hashtag Cannabis Law Summit. So with that, I'm going to introduce the next session. Hi all, thank you for bearing with us through a few technical challenges. Day one of a conference, but it's still exciting to have everyone here, and we just want to go over some quick housekeeping before we jump straight into our first session. So with that said, let's get to some housekeeping. There are a lot of opportunities to interact at this event. During your sessions, there is the ability to ask questions in the Q&C, and you can do that by putting your comments and thoughts in the chat on the right side of the screen. You can even use the face buttons at the bottom to send the speakers emojis and let them know how they're doing. When you network in the lounges or the booths, turn on your cameras and mics, right? We might not get to be in person, but you can definitely build better connections and have better conversations with faces and voices involved. So please turn on those mics and cameras. Also, there will be multiple networking opportunities for one-on-one discussions at the speaker lounge. So, at conferences where we used to walk up to speakers you wanted to talk to after the end of a session, here we're going to be able to go to the speaker lounge and continue those exact same conversations in a one-on-one fashion and connect. Next, presentations and slides will be available and recorded. So after the event, you'll have access to both the slides and recordings of the presentations. If you need any technical support or have any questions, please reach out to the Inside Practice team through the chat function. And if you're blogging or doing any sort of social media, please use the hashtag Cannabis Law Summit. And now into our first session of the day. Cannabis Law Today, the impact of 2020, a new administration, and the push for federal legalization. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this session, Jonathan Robbins. I've known Jonathan Robbins for a very, very long time. He is an acclaimed attorney in this space and the chair of the cannabis practice at Akerman Law Firm. Jonathan counsels financial services clients, as well as clients on the evolving complex legal and business issues that impact companies with interest in regulated substances as well as cannabis. Jonathan has been ranked by Chambers USA as a top lawyer in cannabis law and recognized by the National Law Journal as one of the country's cannabis trailblazers. And he has been published and quoted in national media outlets such as U.S. News and World Report, The American Lawyer, Politico, Washington Post, and Law 360. He's a founding board member of the National Cannabis Bar Association and is also an active member of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and is honestly just an all-around boss in the cannabis space who I myself look up to. So it's my pleasure to introduce you guys to Jonathan Robbins and pass the baton.
Well, thank you, Amanda. That's very nice. I'll pay you after the session. As Amanda said, and let me just echo a couple of comments that she made during her opening remarks, this is a very nascent industry, particularly with respect to the practice of law. When we started our cannabis practice back in 2014, we were the very first national law firm to do so. And since then, things have moved at a very, very rapid pace. There are a lot of fine choices of really quality professionals to assist businesses, cultivators, operators, and anybody else, even ancillary service providers, in every aspect of the industry. We're going to talk today about the pivotal moments in cannabis law over the past year, what this will mean for cannabis in 2021, what's next, and how the effects of the pandemic and the new administration will shape the industry moving forward. Needless to say, it's been a hell of a year. A bitterly fought presidential election and a new administration, not to mention a global pandemic, the likes of which this country or the world has never seen in modern history. At the state level, the citizens of 5 additional states voted to approve cannabis for adult or medical use, followed up by New York, bringing the total to 15 adult use states. We also saw dispensaries in several states deemed as an essential service during the coronavirus lockdown. At the federal level, several pieces of proposed legislation to reschedule or deschedule marijuana as a controlled substance, along with bills to ease the burdens on patients, consumers, and operators, like the Safe Banking Act, the MORE Act, the States Act, and the Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol Act, just to name a few, have made little progress. What can we expect over the next couple of years, and what does the Biden-Harris presidency mean for cannabis reform? To answer these and many more questions, we have a fantastic panel today. For those of you who have worked in or around the industry, Katy, Omar, and Zach's names and faces will undoubtedly be familiar. To those who have not, I'll give you guys a brief introduction. I could take up the whole session with their bios, but I'm going to try not to do that. Katy is the managing partner, at the Astra Law Group in San Francisco. She's president of the International Cannabis Bar Association. On a typical day, you'll find Katy at Astra's self-proclaimed boss lady extraordinaire, out in the front lines advocating fiercely for her clients, as well as behind the scenes helping to build a law firm full of wonderful people she's proud of. And I can tell you from personal experience that Katy indeed does advocate fiercely for her clients, and she has a fantastic team. Whether it's settling a dispute between co-owners of a business, representing individuals in a breach of fiduciary duty or unfair competition claim, or private securities action, Katy's mix of education make her an ideal teammate, supporter, and champion in legal action. From tech companies to breweries, cannabis businesses, and startups. Sorry, that's kind of difficult here. Katy uses her razor-sharp legal skills to enable California's brightest stars to do what they do best, focus on their businesses and their lives, while she handles the disputes that are holding them back. Additionally, with us today is Omar Figueroa. Omar Figueroa. Omar is the managing partner of the law office of Omar Figueroa. He has more than 22 years experience at the vanguard of California cannabis law and is widely respected as an industry expert. Omar earned his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from Yale College in Connecticut and his PhD from Stanford Law School. He graduated from the Trial Lawyers College in Wyoming and earned a certificate from the Arce Institute of Executive Education at the Wharton School after completing intensive boards that lead corporate governance that builds value program in Pennsylvania for directors of corporate boards. Omar is the director of the National Cannabis Industry Association, as well as a director of the Cannabis Travel Association International. He's also a founding lifetime member and former director of the International Cannabis Bar Association, a lifetime member of the Normal Legal Committee, and recognized with the Distinguished Counsel's Award by Normal. Omar is a prolific author, frequent media coverage as a legal expert on cannabis. Cannabis around the world, such as the International Cannabis Business Conference in Barcelona, MJ BizCon Next, the Emerald Cup in Sonoma County, and State of Cannabis in Long Beach, just to name a few. And Omar's cannabis experience is not limited to the law. He has various times over the years served as a judge at the Emerald Cup. He's a member of the Ganjar Foundation Circle, and along with a team of cannabis experts has guided the development of the sommelier certification program. Lastly is my former partner and friend, Zachary Kobrin. Zach is an accomplished attorney with a long track record working on behalf of clients in the marijuana industry. Zach currently serves as the Vice President and General Counsel for Trulieve Cannabis Corp., which is one of the largest cannabis companies in the United States. In his capacity with Trulieve, Zach oversees all legal and compliance matters for the company. Prior to joining Trulieve, Zach was a partner at Akerman, my law firm, in its nationally recognized cannabis practice, where his practice involved advising clients on the evolving complex legal and business issues impacting companies with interests in the marijuana and hemp industries. Again, Zach is a frequent speaker at business legal industry events. Among other honors and responsibilities, Zach was appointed by Florida Chair of Agriculture and Consumer Services to serve on the Florida Medical Cannabis Advisory Committee, where he presently serves as co-chair. Zach's experience in the cannabis industry is not limited to Florida. He's worked with and provided counsel to clients, regulators, and colleagues in multiple states and countries. So welcome to the panel. Everybody's being here. And since I can't scroll down to my notes, and you'll forgive me for looking down, but what I'd like to do is begin with a discussion of the impact on the industry of certain non-political events, namely the coronavirus pandemic over the last year. As Amanda mentioned, during the pandemic, cannabis in many states was essential designation, and I'd like to be asking the panel, and I'll direct it to Katy, what you feel was the impact of the essential designation during COVID.
What a savior. I practice out of San Francisco, California. The California cannabis industry, as Omar can attest to, was already kind of, I was trying to get off the ground and experiencing many problems for the smaller operators and some of the larger operators too. So the essential service designation, I think, saved the industry from certain death. What do you think, Omar?
Yes, and it did not happen automatically. The industry mobilized rather quickly and made sure that not just the medical side of the supply chain, but the entire supply chain was designated as essential. This was critical in California because most medical cannabis patients stopped renewing their medical cannabis recommendations after adult legalization. So the number of actual current patients had dropped precipitously. Had the governor not heeded the call to designate the entire supply chain as essential, what we would have seen is a tremendous resurgence in the unregulated market, which still did quite well during the pandemic. Zach?
Yeah, I think
that's a very fair point to that end. I wanted to get your take how Trulieve's bottom was affected. and you're the rather than the private sector being in-house for a massive company like Trulieve.
So you broke up a little bit, but I think we're kind of talking in terms of from the in-house side, really what was the impact of the essential designation. You know, to Omar's point, there was actually a really good, that's a really good point. The industry mobilized extremely quickly. And not just in the adult use markets, but especially in the medical market, where we saw strong mobilization. There was a real push to ensure early, and I mean, by April 1st in many of these states, as soon as we started seeing the essential designations, that cannabis was going to be included. And it wasn't just the essential designation, but it was the essential designation and the expansion of certain parameters that also, lent itself to helping the industry. So it's not just that dispensaries were allowed to stay open, but that states expanded the ability for, how delivery works, curbside pickup. That's something that I don't think hardly any dispensaries were approaching, except over the last year, we saw an influx of drive-throughs, curbside pickup, things of those nature. So it wasn't just the essential designation, but it was the expansion of the capacity to operate your business that allowed these dispensaries and cannabis operators to really, shine. And it trickled down, whether you're a vertical operation or in a horizontal market, for the retail locations to thrive, they needed delivery, they needed travel, they needed manufacturing and processing, they needed cultivation operations. So it really was this kind of trickle down throughout the entire cannabis industry that kept people employed and kept providing needed relief to those that really needed it during the pandemic.
We did see quite a bit of regulatory innovation as a result.
Oh no. Well,
You were breaking up a little bit, John. Omar, what were you saying?
There was a lot of regulatory innovation as a consequence of the pandemic. As Zachary pointed out, we saw something that I never thought we would see in regulated cannabis, which was curbside pickup. The regulators were even open to like drive-through windows and walk-up windows and all of these risk mitigation measures that previously would have been unthinkable. And so the regulators actually showed quite a bit of flexibility because they really wanted to have an industry to regulate. They saw that the writing was on the wall, and if they were not flexible, it could have been very bad. I think the upshot from the pandemic was not just the essential designation, but the recognition that cannabis is recession and pandemic proof, and is industry that is worth investing in for that reason.
Absolutely. I think that's it's a really interesting, dynamic that the way it came off. But I know John's having a little bit of technical difficulty, so we can kind of pivot the conversation. But I think it lends itself to a really interesting conversation, not just for, what we saw state regulators, but how do we see moving forward at the federal level? I guess Omar, from your perspective, what do you think is the political will for cannabis reform at the federal level?
Well, I think it's stronger than it's ever been. And, I don't want to start making prognostications about when federal legalization will happen, but it does look like there's quite a bit of traction. For example, the Safe Banking Act, which would protect banks and financial institutions that provide financial services to cannabis clients, recently passed through the House of Representatives, and there's a good prospect for it getting heard in committee in the Senate. The more comprehensive reform, the MORE Act, also has quite a bit of wind behind it, but it has to go through multiple committees, and so its road is more uncertain. but I think there's tremendous enthusiasm about the prospect for federal cannabis reform.
You know, Omar, you said something that's really interesting that I think we, you know, those that are practitioners, we kind of, whenever we talk about federal legalization, there's a conversation of incremental versus comprehensive. And, you know, Katy, from your perspective, you know, even under the current situation, do you think we're more likely to see a comprehensive cannabis reform or more incremental reform in specifically targeted areas? And if so, that might be a really interesting, you know, for those in attendance, let's maybe talk about what are those specific kind of targeted areas we could see, you know, comprehensive
Sure.
versus.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an incremental approach. I'm an incrementalist at heart. And, you know, as we're seeing legal cannabis creep across the country and more adult use states and certainly more medical use states, I think what happens is we're going to start to catch this tide. Is what's happening, I think, in the federal landscape is that we're, you know, although the MORE Act and the States Act are gaining traction, it's hard to get votes. Right? We've heard from our friends in Congress about just how difficult it is to create the political will to get these things to a vote and to get the votes that they need to get it passed in this. I mean, we're getting it in the House, but not in the Senate. So the way to get around to it is to, I believe, you know, build the pressure incrementally through things like addressing medical use for children, sick children, medical use for adults, medical use for the elderly, and, you know, starting with little pieces to get society comfortable with it, start breaking the stigma, and make it so that it's popular within a congressional district, so that all of a sudden the people are hearing from their own folks that this needs to be voted on and how they want their congressperson to vote. We're just not there yet. So incremental approach, I think, is the way to go.
Omar, what about you? What are some of the, you know, well, one, what do you think? Do you think a more comprehensive approach or incremental approach is really where we're headed? And I guess the second part, what would be some of those changes? I mean, I know I have my opinion, but I'm curious what you think some of the smaller incremental changes you may see coming down.
Sure. I think the first incremental change we're going to see is protection for the financial services industry and some sort of incarnation of the Safe Banking Act. And that's going to open up the cannabis market in the sense that many people who have not had previous access to capital will soon be able to obtain bank loans and loan guarantees and capitalization for their cannabis businesses. Other types of reforms that we could definitely see would be, if we don't see broad comprehensive reform, I think will be criminal justice reform, like descheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act would have a tremendous impact at the federal level and would allow for immediate interstate commerce. Expanding the convictions of current federal prisoners who are languishing in federal prison. There are still people who are serving the rest of their sentences for conduct that is now engaged in many states.
That's really, those are some really interesting areas. You know, some of the other areas that, you know, I think I've seen or, you know, I'm hoping to see is, you know, I'd like to see some reform maybe towards like small business loans. One of the things that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic was, you know, how many of our clients or how many companies tried for PPP loans or any other SBA and were shut out because they were in the cannabis sector. So things like that, you know, potentially maybe hopefully we'll see IRS reform with 280E coming down. You know, other
Zach,
areas.
that was a huge issue with the people.
Yeah.
Loans affecting. So if I recall correctly, the way that the prohibition and the PPP loan regulations were written is that any professionals that derive any part of their income from a cannabis business would be precluded from applying for a PPP loan. There's heavy penalties coming along with that. And I mean, that would rule out your CPA, your banker, you name it. And so actually the Bar Association that we're all a part of had written a position paper and sent it in to Congress to explain, you know, how widespread that prohibition was, and it's really hurting all the professionals who are trying to do the right thing to, you know, allow the legal cannabis industry to start looking like any other industry out there. And it's how we handle our money, right? It's not illegal to bank cannabis money. It's expensive to bank cannabis money. And then we're not banking cannabis money. We're not doing loans. We're not getting guarantees, just like you were saying. And why can't we have everything that every other industry has?
Yeah, there's an interesting dichotomy in the fact that you had an industry that was deemed essential, that we were asking our employees to come to work in the middle of a pandemic, which they did willingly, but a lot of these companies weren't eligible to receive the relief. So you're right, it was a huge area. I think some of the other areas that we'd love to see some incremental change to is, with regards to the medical treatment, research, the availability of research funds, maybe something with the VA to help veterans. Right now, research around cannabis is predominantly privately funded or foreign government funded. So those are some areas I think would be, fantastic. I don't know if John's back up or not, but there you are. But John, I stole your thunder for a little bit while you were having some technical issues, I guess. But on the federal regulatory side, and maybe I can flip it back to you since this is an area well, John, is what do we see with the U.S. exchanges where maybe those are going next? Do we see any potential for change at NASDAQ and NYSE? And for those that don't know, many of the U.S. cannabis operators, my company as well as is a Canadian public company, listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange, and currently, plant touching entities are not permitted to list on U.S. exchanges. So, do we see any kind of change along those lines coming down the pike? Maybe Katy, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think just as a sheer proximity issue, right? All of a sudden in New York, now that there's a legal cannabis market that's much larger than it was before, there's going to be all sorts of professionals talking to their friends about what's going on in the cannabis industry. And those friends are going to be people that work at the New York Stock Exchange. And I think it's going to catch on like wildfire as it is across the country, right? The more, again, the stigma drops, the more people realize, there not only is a lot of money to be made, but we can and will treat this business like any other one. I think just by osmosis, it's going to start happening. I mean, we just can't deny the business opportunity.
Right. Katy, you touched on something that kind of lends itself to an interesting question. Just the proximity of the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ being in New York, it lends itself to the next obvious 800-pound gorilla question in the cannabis industry. And maybe Omar, you can touch on is, what do you think is the potential impact of legalization in New York? Does one affect the other? But what are your opinions on that?
I mean, I think they're part of the same trend of broad legalization and broad support amongst Americans for not just medical cannabis, which I think is at 80% or higher support, but adult use cannabis, which is now surpassing 60% support. And so it makes sense that they will reinforce each other, these trends, and that we will see an acceleration of legalization. It was, I think the passage of New York legalization, for example, was followed by Virginia legalizing in short order legislatively. And that's something that people thought would take years. And then New Mexico shortly thereafter. So I think it has accelerated the pace of reform. And as Katy was saying, once brilliant financial managers and stockbrokers and hedge fund managers are smoking their fine cannabis and they're pondering the future, they're going to start thinking about the cannabis industry, and they're going to start making connections.
If they haven't already.
Right.
Business opportunity in New York has been there for a while, and people have been watching, and it finally happened. So change is both very fast and slow in the cannabis industry. Seems like once the regulations are in place, changing them is hard. Getting them voted on is difficult, but then change happens immediately once the state comes online.
Yeah. I guess before, I just want to, I'd be remiss if I didn't apologize on John's behalf. I know I think he's actually having an internet outage where he is located, and that may have affected him getting bounced. So
I guarantee he has FOMO right now. Don't you think?
he's absolutely, and I'm having a little FOMO for him. But beyond, one of the things that we've always talked about in the cannabis industry is what other blue chip industries do we see entering, right? Is it big, potentially, do we see big tobacco, big pharma, but the one that I think a lot of us as practitioners already have talked to people on, or because they're all interested and they're getting ready, is really that CPG industry, right? That consumer packaged goods industry, Unilever, Johnson Johnson, things like that. So Omar, I know this is an area you've touched on a lot and you've looked into, but where do you see maybe, as the industry is moving and evolving, how can, say, CPG businesses prepare for a more broader federal landscape?
Sure. I think, these businesses are going to start, for example, by registering trademarks. At the federal level, you can register trademarks for hemp products that are federally lawful and are used in lawful interstate commerce. And so we're probably going to start seeing, Unilever and Procter & Gamble start protecting their intellectual property, if they haven't already, by registering trademarks in the hemp category, and start, to carve out, these intellectual property portfolios and create families of brands. Katie?
That's a really good point. Katie, what other areas maybe do you see, or what other industries do you see? IP is a huge area that Omar, I mean, it really is a gateway into. But are there any other sectors that you maybe see, or any other industries that you see that, as soon as there is this kind of loosening, are going to jump right in?
Oh, the alcohol industry. Oh man, we've already seen a lot of that in California with the craft beer movement. You're not allowed to put cannabis in an alcohol product in California. It's not allowed. However, everybody wants to do it, and I think that's going to be something that will be very fun and an exciting investment opportunity. That's certainly one of, and also with the CPG. I already see this stuff on the shelves at my local Rite Aid and my local grocery store, and it blows my mind sometimes that it's all hemp based and right there available, and your local soccer moms are buying it.
Yeah,
huge.
Yeah, do we see, I guess, beyond the CPG, where do you see maybe some of the health food companies, especially on the hemp side? I know we deal a lot with marijuana, but on the hemp side, do we see, a time when you walk down the vitamin aisle and it's just treated like any other vitamin or nutraceutical, where we're just going to see, a whole line of, we're already seeing it, CBD products, but maybe even eventually, over-the-counter marijuana products. But, do we see health food companies wanting to get into the space?
Oh, absolutely. So many of them. And they get into trouble when they're actually an intellectual property issue, when they're trying to name their products. There's a lot of existing companies that have names very similar to what these guys would want to name their CPG company. So, watch out for intellectual property that's already taken. Do not do a knockoff. That's something that people think is cute, but it'll just cost you money. What do you think, Omar?
Yes, that's a common pitfall, is doing knockoffs of existing products. I'm also thinking that there's other aspects of intellectual property that are getting developed, like trade secrets. We're seeing like all of these techies in the Bay Area who love cannabis. They're, of course, putting two and two together, and they're trying to come up with new technologies for the ingestion of cannabis and new ways of manufacturing new cannabis products. For example, we did not have like the rosin as a technology until like 7 years ago. Who would have thought that pressing together cannabis and adding heat would be a new way of extracting it, and very low tech, but effective. And so I think there's a lot of experimentation going on. And I know that there's utility patents for plants, plant patents for plants, Plant Variety Protection Act certificates, and of course, a whole bunch of trade secrets that are getting protected these days. And so there is a lot of work for lawyers. It's all super interesting because it's completely novel. And if you ski, skiers love fresh powder. Well, for us lawyers, it's all fresh powder.
That's a fantastic analogy. And, the IP is such a fantastic area. I know when we talked about this before, and we touched a little bit, but didn't talk a lot about IP. But whether it's trademarks and getting USPTO to open up federal approval for for trademarks, or seeing more space in the patent side. I think for those that are lawyers and practitioners in the IP sector, this is going to be a fantastic next few years. I know we're running out a little bit of time, so I kind of want to just get to the last few questions and then maybe open it up to the group. But in a broader sense, both of you have been practicing in this area for, I think we've all joked, cannabis years is like dog years. 1 year feels like 7, right? So it feels like we've all been doing this for so long. But for those in the, like Amanda said, new AM law firms or even smaller firms that are really jumping into the space, what are the skill sets? And we'll start with you, Omar, but like, what are some of the skill sets that lawyers and cannabis lawyers should be developing that will help serve their clients better in the future?
Yeah, I think the first one is always be learning. You cannot take your previous knowledge as your laurels and rest on your laurels. You always have to be expanding, attending events such as this, attending and teaching continuing legal education events, because it's evolving so rapidly that no single person or even a team of persons can keep up with all the developments. And so I think that cannabis lawyers have done an incredible job of assembling ourselves into the International Cannabis Bar Association, which Katy Young ably leads. And it's an amazing resource. And so the first thing is, realize that this is not like trust and estates law where it's settled and there's a lot of case precedent and
Oh, we lost him.
We lost him.
From there this session. Oh man, we're cursed.
Evolving. So for people who thrive on novelty, such as myself, it's a super interesting area of practice.
Awesome. Thank you, Omar. Katy, what about you? What are some of the skill sets that you think lawyers, either existing cannabis lawyers or those maybe that are watching that are wanting to get into thinking it's a new area, what are some of the areas they should be developing and working towards to help serve their clients?
I sort of bristle at the term cannabis lawyer because it actually what we're referring to is someone of substantive competence who also understands the cannabis overlay. So I think the most important thing is to have your substantive competence down, right? For me, I'm a business litigator. I do business, IP, and real estate litigation. That's what I handle. I understand the cannabis overlay on top of that, right? There's people who are merger and acquisition lawyers who need to understand the cannabis overlay. Be a substantive master of your area of law and then understand the local cannabis regulations and then writ larger within your state. And then certainly if you're getting into any sort of licensing deals that cross state lines, consider that as well. So really for me, it's about the substantive competence and then overlaid with the hyper locality of cannabis regulation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, the way you framed it, because when I remember when I started practicing in the space, I would just tell people cannabis isn't just another widget, to use a lawyer term. It just happens to be one of the most highly regulated widgets we've all dealt with, and someone asked me to explain that once. And I said, listen, this is almost 10 years ago. If I had a client that said, I want to buy and sell oil and mineral rights in the middle of Texas, that's a highly regulated industry. Our approach would be the same. Right. I'm a regulatory and corporate lawyer by background, now where I am now. But Katy, you're exactly right. Hone your skills. And, I think one of the, advice I like to give other lawyers that want to get in spaces, be willing to adapt, right? Always be willing to adapt, to Omar's part, be willing to learn. If you think you know everything in this space, you will not succeed, because it is rapidly changing, at a pace that none of us can keep up with.
Zach, I tell people we do the same thing that everyone else does in terms of substantive competence area. We do the same thing as everyone else does, except surfing on a hot lava flow. How quick and fast everything's changing.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I know we're running short on time, and to be honest, the three of us could sit here, and I wish John was here. We could probably chat because we do it all the time. But I want to maybe open up if there's a lot of people in the room, maybe if there's some questions. I think if you have a question, put it in the Q&A piece of the on the right, and we'll see if we can answer. I know a lot of people are chatting, but if you have a question, maybe drop it in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer. I think I'm doing that right.
I'm not sure we're gonna have questions because I don't think we're live. Remember?
Oh, you're right.
Let's go ahead and see if you can toss another one at us, Zach.
You guys are
Oh, we
live.
are live?
Oh, we are live. All right.
Great. So if you do have any questions, any of the 120.
Oh, I see a question. Any advice for attorneys looking to expand their practice to cannabis law / resources? So what resources are you all aware of? I know of one. Omar here is a prolific author and literally wrote the book on California cannabis regulations, and now New York too, right?
That's right. The New York book just came out as well.
All right. And then we've mentioned before the International Cannabis Bar Association. It's the only bar association you really want to be a part of. We're very fun. We put on CLE, kind of similar to this. You'll see a lot of our members at this conference today and throughout the days.
So there's another question I see in there that's a really interesting point. And I don't know if you want to touch on it, Omar. How do you see cannabis regulation impacting immigration law?
I think we might see some immigration reform where low-level cannabis convictions are no longer automatically disqualifying for admission into the United States. But I think we will see like cannabis-specific reform to like help people who would otherwise be disqualified from citizenship or admission.
There's so much to do around that. I mean, currently even foreigners that invest in cannabis companies in the United States could be deemed not fit for admission to the United States simply by virtue of having invested their money into a cannabis business. So the amount of reform that's needed in the immigration space is truly huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sorry, I'm just reading through to try and catch some of the questions. Oh, so this is an interesting one. Someone's asking about hospitality and tourism. I know that, especially in some adult use states, consumption lounges. I know a couple of years ago, people approached me about trying to, figure out ways to do hotel industry. Canna tourism is something that we've all kind of discussed. Where do you see this kind of hospitality and tourism picking up? I mean, do we eventually see Disneyland or wherever? I don't know. I'm just talking out of turn, but
I hope so.
Oh, it's for sure going to pick up. There's so much pent up demand to travel and to have group experiences. And already the cannabis hospitality industry is preparing for it. Yeah, I'm a board member of the Cannabis Travel Association International, and we had to rebrand ourselves. We used to be called the California Cannabis Tourism Association until we had dozens of members from all over the world who wanted to join and who wanted to expand the focus. And so now we're International Cannabis Travel Association. And I can tell you all over the world, people are interested in cannabis hospitality and tourism. And I will be giving a little TED-style talk on that later before lunch.
Okay, I'm going through some of the questions. I know we probably have time for one or two more. How does rescheduling cannabis help cannabis corporations? My understanding is that it will not give cannabis corporations access to financial institutions. So I'm going to touch on it a little bit. So there are banks that bank the industry, right? It's just a matter of knowing the banks that do and understanding that financial services is a risk-reward basis. You have to pay for the risk. There are increased compliance measures that go along, whether it's just depository services or larger financial-based services. Would I love to see a point, hopefully soon, where we can see traditional financing, go to your local bank and get a small business loan? Absolutely. Omar, you're nodding your head. Where do you maybe see, what's your opinion on the current state of financial institutions and where you see things moving?
Well, I think more financial institutions are jumping into cannabis banking. The ones that are already offering cannabis banking services are lowering their fees significantly as they put into place these Bank Secrecy Act measures, and they're able to serve increasing numbers of clients. So we used to have very little of accessible cannabis banking in California. And now there are many state chartered credit unions that do provide those services. And so if you have a regulated cannabis business in California, you can get bank accounts. And that has really made things a lot easier for these cannabis operators. They don't have to deal with the cash management and security issues that would take up hours of their week.
So I think we may have time for, and I don't know, Amanda, or if the administrators are on, let me know. Do we have time for one more question? We can just ask and cut us off. But so someone's asking about safe banking. I know Omar touched on it a little bit before. Safe banking, I think is everyone thinks is going to be the first domino to fall. Hopefully, it's passed the House a few times. It's sitting in the Senate. Senator Schumer has indicated, his, desire to see something move. So hopefully we'll see some movement with that. This is a good question maybe to end on. Any advice for newly licensed lawyers trying to break into the cannabis industry? Katie, what do you say to that? Also, as a young new cannabis lawyer.
Well, I gotta say, it's not only the substantive competence, but as Amanda was saying when she opened the sessions today, your network, right? Who you know. It's still very much, the cannabis industry is still very much who you know, right? These folks, it's an old industry that's been around for a long time, and we like to work with people that we love and trust. So, getting in with other lawyers who, have those referrals and can get you under their wing, I think that's the best way to start.
Yeah. It's a really fantastic point. And, I know you talked about INCBA a lot, but it's very interesting, when you're involved in other bar associations or other trade groups within, especially as a lawyer, there's a competitive nature to it, right? When you're at a big firm or a small firm, because, you live our life on getting new clients, servicing clients. I've always appreciated the fact that, when I was in private practice, if I had a question in California, I could call Katie or call Omar.
Absolutely.
We didn't care, right? So that was the one thing that we found. I've always found interesting about cannabis practitioners, lawyers in the space, is that natural competition that you see in other legal sectors. You don't really see it. Whether
it's other brave souls. Anyone else who's willing to join the fray with us, I will always give you my time. And there's just such an abundance mentality, as Amanda was saying. The opportunities for business and clients and referrals is absolutely huge. The problem you have when you get good at this is that you'll have too much work.
Well, I think I think that might be a good place to stop, since we're all laughing about it. But I think Amanda, or I guess the administrators, do the participants have our contact information? I would say if anyone wants to reach out to us, has any questions, you can always reach out to any of us, John included. As Amanda and John pointed out, everyone has been practicing this space for a while in their own right, and everyone is an expert in their own right. So you've got a wealth of resources here.
Call us.
And speakers can proceed to the speaker lounge, where you can connect with them after this during our next break. Our break is about to start now, but I'll pass it back to Jaylene.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.